The Nazis were dreaming of a 1,000-year empire. This is how it started. And a mere 12 years later, this is how it ended. Were all the killing units German? Whenever we speak about the Nazis, we say the Nazis were Germans, the Germans were killing. That's the sort of a logic. For the fun of it, I sat down and I made a list of all the nations that the Germans had occupied. And here's a list. Every single nation contributed collaborator killing groups, except every single one of them. Because German soldiers couldn't possibly kill Greek Jews or Croat Jews, because they didn't speak the language. Where do you find them? Hungarian Jews. Local people had to be involved in it. And that's what happened. The next question is of course, was the Holocaust the battle of Christians against Jews? That's how it's very often being presented. You know, it was us against them type of thing. We know that 6 million Jews died. What is truly, and I mean truly unfortunately forgotten, is that about 6 million Christians and Muslims died too. Altogether, roughly 12 million people died. The numbers vary between 12, 13, 14 million, but the numbers are so high that it really doesn't matter. If I were to ask you to imagine 12 million people, you couldn't. You're not used to dealing with numbers of that magnitude. So let's line up 12 million people, one person behind the other, and allow 1 foot 3 inches for each person. And if we lined up these people in New York City, the line would stretch from New York across the Midwest, Rocky Mountains, all the way to California. I wanted to find some sort of a reasonable comparison, some sort of a visual thing. So I simply took my slide rule and I did some calculations, and this is what came out. And that's 12 million people. Roughly 6 million died in the concentration camps, and the other 6 million in the killing fields of the Ukraine and other countries. How was it possible for so much evil to succeed? It has been said that all that is necessary for evil to succeed is that good people do nothing. In 1933, when Hitler and his party came to power, they were burning books publicly. The good people did nothing. What kind of books, by the way, did they burn? They burned books by Jewish authors, by American authors, by communist authors, by people suspected of being Jewish, communist, or whatever else. When they arrested people and put them into camps, the good people did nothing. When they banned paintings by Van Gogh and Picasso, the good people did nothing. As a matter of fact, it was very, very interesting. They had an exhibit to shame some of these modern artists in Germany. So they put up a big exhibit of Picassos and Degas and various other painters. And the museum was overrun by the public. I've seen photographs where they went on for miles and miles round the block, you know, people lining up to see these exhibits, and nobody went to the normal. When they arrested Catholic, 1,900 Catholic priests and 2,100 Protestant ministers and put them into camps. Good people did nothing. When they arrested people of color and put them into camps, the good people did nothing. When they lined up gypsies and shot them, the good people did nothing. When they wiped out entire towns such as Lidice in Czechoslovakia and the Stoma in Greece, the good people did nothing. Lidice and the Stoma, Lidice particularly, was destroyed because Reinhard Heydrich, and I'll talk about him a little bit later. Actually, I might as well talk about him right now. Reinhard Heydrich was assassinated by a group of Czechs who were trained in Great Britain. Heydrich was head of the all German police forces, including the standard police, the Schutzpolizei, or Schupo as they were calling, the Sicherheitspolizei, which was security, and the Gestapo. There was one man in Germany who feared him more than anybody else, and that was Himmler. Heydrich was referred to by Hitler as a man with an iron heart. And he was put in command of the Czech territory, and a group of Czech soldiers, partisans went to England, they got trained there, they came back, and they killed them. And as a result of that, they wiped out Lidice and another tiny little town. They wiped out so much that they even flattened out the town. They plowed it down. The town Lidice had been rebuilt next to the area where the old town was. The women were all taken to concentration camps. The children were given away to German deserving women, and the men were all shot. That much for Lidice. When the Nazis in the Hadamar Institute, when they killed 250,000 people, because according to the government, their life was unworthy of life. There were people who were eating German food, but didn't contribute to the economy. There were handicapped people, mentally retarded people, and there were incurably sick children. They injected them with gasoline and they buried them. And the good people did nothing. Here are just some of the people who were persecuted. And I'm stressing this because the Holocaust and Hitler was not just a Jewish issue, but it's always been brought up as a Jewish issue. And it wasn't anything but. For instance, you have specific authors, painters, Polish noblemen, selected Catholic priests, communists, Jews. This is a separate group. Gypsies, opposing Protestant ministers, blacks and people with black ancestors, many children, actually all the children that could be called of mixed couples, black and white, were sterilized. Gay people, citizens and their families who hid persecutors, members of labor unions, even farmers who hid food. And the good people did nothing. Why didn't most Germans object to this? Because the state had priority over everything. The national anthem was Germany, Germany above everything in the world, above parents, family, friends, teachers, church. So people didn't trust each other anymore. They didn't know who is going to say something to the government or not. People stopped writing, people stopped composing, they stopped painting. What kind of a people were the Nazis? And this is strictly for the children, for the students, you know. I talk about them that they were cowards who wrote anonymous letters, and then people committed suicide. Today it's called cyberbullying. I talk about that they belonged to bands, that they ganged up together to beat up people, just like these 7 bullies here on Long Island who killed Marcelo Lucero. I talk about Nazi bullies who enjoyed senseless destruction and painted on windows and on walls, just as we happen to have it right now here on Long Island too. Here we have some kids who, teacher who wrote on the blackboard that Jews are our biggest enemy, and so humiliating. And just like these people went to scrub the sidewalks and were humiliated, many of these people, judges and so on, later on committed suicide. And just like kids here have to pick up books on the floor, they're also humiliated. And I talk about bystanders encourage bullying. Nazis prided themselves in finding ways to oppress others. So they had some 2,000 anti-Jewish rules. Just 2,000. I mean, I can't even imagine what they would be. One of them was that a non-Jew is not permitted to drink the milk from a cow that is owned by a Jew. I mean, just to go ahead to show you know, to what extent they went. And for instance, the public was forbidden to buy from Jews. Now this goes back to 1933, 34. Afterwards it became immaterial anyway. But they had signs like these, you know, outside the Jewish department stores. Germans, defend yourself. Don't shop from Jews, you know. Jews were fired by all hospitals, schools, colleges, and corporations. And then I tell the students, hey, you know, don't be so damn smug, because it wasn't too long ago where we had signs like these all over the United States. And we had signs like these, and signs like these, and signs like these. My problem speaking in schools is to try to make a 70, 80-year-old subject relevant to today. Because they say this happened 6 generations ago. I have absolutely nothing to do with it, and it happened 3,000 miles away. So where's my connection to all of this? And it's very hard. I have to make a connection, because if I don't connect, then the whole thing is academic. I might as well tell them about the subjugation of children on the moon. Jews got a big J stamped on their identification card, and they got a new middle name. If they were men, it was Israel, and if you were a woman, it was Sarah. And so this is a type of a Jewish passport. Has a big J on it, and the middle name of Sarah. The J was not a German invention. The J was an invention by anybody else? The Swiss. The Swiss were the first people who put a J on Jewish passports. Let me give you an idea. The Jews tried to escape to Switzerland. And they allowed, in the beginning, something like 20,000 Jews managed to escape to Switzerland. And that was it. Then they put a stop to it. And then they taxed the Swiss Jewish population to pay for the people in that internment camp for the 20,000. In other words, there were Swiss Jews and they had to pay for them. On the other hand, they allowed 200,000 non-Jews to enter Switzerland, for which the Swiss government paid for. That's how anti-Semitic they were. The Swiss were the biggest traders of dental gold during World War I and during World War II. Dental gold from the concentration camps. That's where they got the dental gold from. And the biggest traders of art. Jews had to wear yellow star. And if you were in Germany, this is the way the star looked. If you were in Holland, if your name was Anne Frank, that's the star look. And these were the biggest enemies of Germany. Because as long as you have a little child, that child will grow up, and that child will too have children. But if you manage to arrest all these little children and then murder them, there would be no more little children. And as a result of that, roughly 1.5 million little children were arrested and murdered. Jews lost their citizenship, so they had signs like these all over Germany. Caution, Jews in village. They had special benches for Jews. Wasn't too long ago we had special benches for black people in this country. Special water fountains, special movie seats, swimming pools, and telephone booths. Jews could not own radios, Jews were thrown out of their homes, and eventually Jews were placed in camps and in ghettos. And the good people did nothing. How was it possible for so much hatred to exist? There was 0.75% of Germany was Jewish. Here in the United States, we have 3% of the population. Most Germans have never even seen a Jew. They didn't even know what a Jew looked like. Nazis dehumanized the Jews. They showed them as a worm, a snake, as caterpillar. And once you've done that, then you have a beautiful 3-step logic. Jews are vermin. Vermin must be exterminated, and therefore Jews must be exterminated. And how about cartoons like this? This cartoon is not from Germany, by the way. It's right here from the United States. I got it in a newspaper a few years ago. Paper that's still being published out here. White Aryan resistance. And in it you have cartoons like this, and cartoons like this. Hatred is very much alive here. Nazis had a game for kids, board game, played with dice, called Jews Out. And the first kid who got rid of 6 Jews won the game. Of course, Jews tried to escape from Germany, but as Dr. Chaim Weizmann, the first president of Israel, said, the world is divided into places where the Jews cannot live and places where they cannot enter. So 32 nations got together to find out who is going to take the Jews. 32 nations. They were big nations: Brazil, United States, Australia, New Zealand, you name it. But everybody had some sort of an excuse. Australia said, we don't have a racial problem and don't want to import one. Let me stop very briefly at this point, because it's very important. Jews are not a race. It was Goebbels who established that Jews are a race. You have white Jews, yellow Jews, pink Jews, black Jews. You have Jews of all different color. Any person anywhere who wants to convert to Judaism and wants to spend the time, by all means, you can become a Jew. But because Germany was looking for racial purity, they say that Jews are a race. And Australia picked it up. They say, fine, to us, suddenly Jews are a race. We don't want to disturb the demographic equilibrium, said Venezuela. And the United States said that Jews are political refugees. The Swiss said the lifeboat is full. And the Canadian representative truly set the tone for the conference when he said, let the Germans solve their Jewish problem. In other words, let the murderer solve his victim's problem. And as a result of this, of the 32 nations who had assembled in Evian, and by the way, the conference was planned for Switzerland, but the Swiss said, no thank you, we don't want you because we don't want to spoil our trading with Germany, do it somewhere else. So that's why they went to France. There were huge casinos there, there were skiing facilities and so on, and most of the people never even attended the conference. They just had a damn good time at government expense. And only 2 nations decided to accept refugees. The Dominican Republic and Costa Rica were the only 2 nations. That's it. In other words, the good people did nothing. And when the Nazis found out what was happening there in Evian, they said, wonderful. And we had the Night of the Broken Glass. And the Night of the Broken Glass was organized by Reinhard Heydrich, the same protector I spoke to you about before. And he was murdered, and a few months later. This happened in November, and he was, I think, murdered in July. And in one single night, 7,000 businesses were destroyed, 1,700 houses of worship were destroyed or vandalized, 30,000 people were arrested, and within 1 month, 1,000 were murdered. And then, to me, the true definition of chutzpah comes out, where the Jews were fined for these riots, because the Nazis said, if it wouldn't be for you Jews, we wouldn't have had to put out fire brigades to make sure that non-Jewish businesses don't burn down. And we had to use policemen to control the looting. $5 billion. There were 3 reactions throughout the world. The United States recalled its ambassador, but retained diplomatic relations. The Australian Aborigines League tried to complain, but couldn't. And Great Britain saved 9,800 children under the age of 17, called it Kindertransport. In the United States, New York, Congressman Wagner from New York and Congresswoman Rogers from Connecticut introduced a bill to save 20,000 children. Because if tiny Great Britain could save 10,000, I mean, why can't we save 20,000? But the bill was sort of derailed by the statement of the wife of the U.S. Commissioner of Immigration, who said that 20,000 charming children will all too soon grow up into 20,000 ugly adults. And she was absolutely right. She must have, at one point, been a very charming child, but she turned into a very ugly adult, and the bill failed. There was resistance in Germany. Hans Scholl and his sister Sophie Scholl and their friend Christoph Probst. There were 3 young students. They wrote 6 flyers over a 6-month period of time. They were arrested in the morning, sentenced to death by lunchtime, and beheaded by the afternoon. In January 1942, we had the final solution to the Jewish question. A whole group of top SS men under the leadership of Reinhard Heydrich met and discussed the Jewish question, and after, I think it was 1 hour and 37 minutes, they decided to kill all the Jews. 1 hour and 37 minutes. And afterwards they toasted with French brandy. 10 million Jews were sentenced to death, 6 million were executed. And then World War II broke out, nothing could be done. I was, in 1933, Jews were fired by all hospitals, schools, colleges, and corporations. My father was a mechanical and an electrical engineer, and he worked in Germany for major corporations, Siemens. And 1933 he lost his job, and that was it. And it wasn't a question of being fired, it was a matter of companies were not permitted to hire Jews. So it's not a question of leaving and finding another job. No company was permitted to hire Jews. Because what Germany was trying to do at that time, they wanted to make it economically impossible for Jews to work in Germany. If you were a doctor, you had to treat patients, but you were not permitted to accept money from insurance companies. By the way, I spoke to you about Kristallnacht. Just a couple of things. All the money that the insurance companies paid out was confiscated by the German government. So if your house got burned down, that was it, finished. The money was collected by the German government. They could not be paid to the individuals. And so we left Germany for Yugoslavia. And why? Okay, let me interrupt very briefly. My father had been an officer in the Austro-Hungarian army, and he spent time during World War II in Yugoslavia. He was originally from Hungary, a part that became later on Transylvania, which was Romania. And so he spent time in Yugoslavia. He knew Yugoslavia. My mother comes from a very, very old, well-established German Jewish family. And she served during World War I in the German military. And she won an Iron Cross for saving German soldiers from being gassed. I'd like to say one thing, and it's important for you to remember, that during World War I, the German Jewish population amounted to 0.75%. And 3% of the German military were Jews. That means more than 4 times their anticipated percentage joined the German military. German Jews were very, very proud Germans because they have been persecuted in hundreds of years since the Spanish Inquisition. Occasionally a little bit, but basically they lived very safe. And they wanted to protect their country. So my mother won Iron Cross. That's a picture of me and my sister when we left for Germany. It used to be adorable. We moved to a town called Zagreb, a beautiful town. But the problem that we faced and that my parents faced was that we had to learn 2 new languages, Croat and Serbian. My parents never managed to learn the language. And that was one of the problems that many refugees had who went to other countries. The other problem was that the other countries didn't recognize diplomas and so on. My father thought he's going to be an engineer in Yugoslavia. It turned out that Yugoslavia didn't need any engineers because all the raw materials they had, and they had lots and lots of raw materials, were exported to Germany, where they were manufactured and purchased back. So Yugoslavia didn't need any engineers. 75% of Yugoslavia was illiterate, just to give you another idea. And then I usually give kids a homework. I tell them, ask your parents, grandparents, or relatives, what did they do for a living in their home country, and how did they start in this country? Just to try to get some sort of connection. Anyway, we lived in Zagreb and somehow my father made somehow a living. Suddenly we went on vacation in the mountains or down to the Adriatic Ocean. That's a picture of me when I was about 11 years old. And then Europe got slowly and slowly filled with Germany. In 1940, my father died, and a couple of months later, Germany invaded Yugoslavia, and Yugoslavia fell apart. And the part where I lived, Croatia, came under the ruling of Dr. Ante Pavelić. And Pavelić was a fascist of the worst kind. Here is a typical poster of his, which said, he who does not drink a liter of Serbian blood is not a Croat. God be with the Croats. I mean, we can't imagine in our minds this, but there is a sort of a how do you call it, not Mongolian, you know, when the tribes came from Asia down, Genghis Khan and his boys, you know, that sort of a mentality, even the mentality of impaling people on poles, there was still left there. First thing we had to do is we had to learn immediately, we had to wear a yellow star with the letter Ž, which stands for Židov, and as you can see, we had to wear a yellow star in the front and also in the back. So when we went on the street, people used to push you or throw garbage at you and so on. So the obvious question is, hey, why did you do that? So the reason why we had to wear the yellow star was simply this. I lived in a city. And very often, suddenly the soldiers used to come, block off both ends of the street, put a soldier in each doorway, and then check your identification card. Now, if you had no identification card, you were arrested. If you had an identification card and had being notified, being recorded as a Jew, and you didn't have a star, you were arrested. And sometimes if you had both, you were arrested. But anyway, so I went very rarely out on the street. They immediately opened a concentration camp called Jasenovac. Jasenovac, people never hear about Jasenovac. Am I in business? Yeah. People never hear about Jasenovac. There were 8 extermination camps during World War II. 8 extermination camps. 7 of them were in Poland, and 1 was in Croatia, and that was Jasenovac. Estimates range between 200 and 600,000 people who were killed there. Now you're going to ask, hey, what was the range, how come such a range. The problem was that Jasenovac was on the river, on the edge of the river Sava. And people were killed, thrown in the Sava runs into the Danube into the Black Sea, and that was that. And so you had thousands and thousands, the minimum 200,000 people were murdered there. And they were mostly murdered by having their throats cut with knives like these. They had competitions between soldiers who could cut the most throats. In one town in Kragujevac, a couple of German soldiers were injured by the partisans, and one was shot. And they went to the local high school. They picked up 200 students, took them out of town and shot them. There were policemen and there were SS-men all over the streets throughout the town. And if you walked with a star along the sidewalk and an SS-man saw you, there was an SS-man, there was a German soldier on the sidewalk, he had to step into the gutter. So my mother hid me with a couple when I was 13 years old. First with one couple and then with another couple. And I couldn't go out on the streets. I couldn't wear boots in the apartment because people below would hear me. I couldn't go near the window. I was hidden like that for 2 years, from the age of 13 to 15. And one morning there was a knock at the door and a bunch of Gestapo agents walked in. And they arrested the couple because the couple was developing films for the resistance movement, and I helped them with that. And so they beat me up, they locked me up in the basement, and they really, there was one small Gestapo man, and he enjoyed hitting me. And it was just one of his great joys. And for 3 days I was locked up in the basement, and then I was shipped to a border town between Croatia and Slovenia. And I was locked up in a little cell which was filled with millions and millions of fleas. There were fleas in my nose, up my ears, in my hair, and I was wearing shorts. It was springtime, and I was miserable. And from there I was shipped to Graz, Austria, and there I was locked up in this building, which still today is the police station in Graz. And I was there for about 6 weeks, locked up in a cell with 3 other kids. 2 of them had been arrested for burglary, and the 3rd kid had murdered his mother. And I was the 4th criminal there. And one day I looked out of the window into the prison, into the police station yard, and I saw my mother walking around in the yard. And it's the last time I ever saw her. From there, I was shipped to Vienna, and in Vienna I spent the night in this beautiful house of worship, this beautiful center, absolutely gorgeous. Except by the time I came there, it looked like this. It was destroyed during the night of the broken glass. There were torn prayer books there, and broken glass and soot and dirt. And I spent the night there, and from there I and 100 other people were sent on a train, and we were shipped under heavy guard to a place called Terezin in Czechoslovakia. And look at the thickness of the wall. Look at the height of the wall. Look at the shape. What it actually was, it was a fortress built in 1780, and when planes came, and fortresses became useless.
Hit it again. Mike. That's good.
Fortresses became useless, and because all you had to do is you fly overhead and drop a bomb and it's curtains. So the military moved out, and civilians moved in, and about 2,900 civilians lived there. And when Hitler came, he said, move out, moved all the civilians out, and he replaced it with Jews from Germany, Czechoslovakia, and Austria, and a few Danish Jews. I explain kids what a concentration camp is, and I don't know. Anyway, this is the way the town looked. It was old and dilapidated. Now remember, 2,900 people lived there before, and the Nazis replaced it with 90,000 people, where 2,900 people lived before. So for every person, 30 people were, and this is where we slept. This is where we washed ourselves, and that's how people arrived. I came, I helped lay these railroad tracks, I made rooms, I made baskets. I don't know, I banged my head. The town was used by the Nazis as a demonstration town. They took all the intelligentsia of Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia, and put them in there, so that when the Swiss authorities and the Swedish authorities wanted to find out whether the Nazis are adhering to the Geneva Convention, they could come there and they could look. And they were having musical instruments and so on. But obviously they wouldn't show them with 90,000 people there. So every time before the people came, before the announcement, thousands upon thousands were put on trains and sent to Auschwitz, the gas chambers, and that was that. Let me summarize the Terezin situation. 141,000 people were shipped to Terezin, and 17,000 survived. The food improved every time we got any inspections. No, I have, thank you, I have some gin, Life in Terezin was sort of a strange, bizarre, but you had culture and you had something undescribable. For instance, we rarely saw SS men there, because that was on purpose. These were typical houses in which we lived. One of the jobs I had was to exterminate vermin. And so we went to these houses and we taped up the inside of the windows, and then we took a big brazier and heated up the house, and then we took cyclone gas and we put on gas masks and we emptied these little cans of cyclone, which is cyanide really, and spilled the cans all over, slammed the door, came back the next day, put on gas mask and aired the place, and then swept out dead rats and mice. The Nazis tried to use this cyclone gas on people, but it took too long. And then they developed Cyclone B, which is with prussic acid, which was much, much faster. And they also eliminated the odor from it, so people wouldn't recognize it. I was there for 10 months, and after 10 months they brought in a whole bunch of railroad cars, and they loaded us up, 100 people per car, slammed the door shut, and off we went on a 3-day ride east. We didn't have the slightest idea where we were. And they, after 3 days lying on the floor in our feces, urine, They opened the door and we were immediately faced by a group of SS men and by prisoners in striped uniforms. We didn't have the slightest idea where we were, but one thing that sort of came out was they immediately started hitting us with sticks. Everybody, if you notice, had a walking stick. Sort of with all the modern weaponry available, no, they used walking sticks. They hit us over the heads, over the shoulders, over the legs, wherever they could. And all the SS men wore these uniforms, and they had the skull and crossbones on their shoulder. They were what is known as the Sonderkommando by the SS. Sonderkommando were SS of the SS, were special volunteers of the SS who volunteered to kill people, to murder people. They were tested, you go kill that person, and they would kill him, and that's it, fine, you passed. If you couldn't do it, then you flocked, you didn't join that. And we didn't know where we were. Behind us there was a gate, and next to us there was electrically charged barbed wire. So we asked, where are we? And they told us, you're in Auschwitz II, or Birkenau, which is an extermination camp. Never heard about it, never heard of Auschwitz, never heard of extermination camp, and knew nothing about it. There were actually 3 Auschwitz camps. There was Auschwitz I, which were brick buildings, and where all the prisoners were criminals. They were all from penitentiaries. They all came from jails and had been transferred there. They were murderers, homosexuals, thieves, you name it. Then there was Auschwitz II, Auschwitz III, which was a factory, which was that made synthetic rubber. There were a few prisoners there. And then there was Auschwitz II, also known as Birkenau. I mean, you hear somebody having been in Auschwitz, it's 99.9% that they were in Auschwitz II. This is the way the camp looked. Everybody arrived at the green spot at the bottom, which were the railroad tracks. And then probably 80–90% of the prisoners who arrived were immediately walked over to the red spots. Those were the gas chambers and the crematoria. And because they had been told that they're being resettled, everybody brought in suitcases with all their properties. And they left that at the railroad tracks, and then it was taken by prisoners and placed where the black spot is. That area was called Canada. I don't know why it was called Canada, but that's where all the properties were sorted and then taken and distributed either to SS men or basically primarily sent to Germany to deserving German women. The area above the green spot was the men's camp, the gypsy camp, and Jehovah's Witnesses, and the area below the green spot was the women's camp. And where the blue spot was, that's where the Nazis had their, where the SS men had their headquarters. And despite the fact that the US military knew exactly what was going on, not one single bomb ever fell on the gas chambers, on the railroad tracks, or on the Nazi headquarters. 2 men escaped from Auschwitz. 2. In all the history, exactly 2 managed to escape. And one of them got to England, and in England he got together with some military people and some ministers and rabbis, and he told them, for God's sakes, bomb the place. And these ministers and rabbis said, no, don't bomb, don't throw a bomb. Somebody might get injured. Anyway, again, the good people did nothing. This is the way we looked. We had a number and we had a triangle. And depending why you were the camp, that's how the triangle was colored. And so you have political prisoners, red, gay people, pink, Jehovah's Witnesses, purple, gypsies, black, Jews, yellow, and thieves, and murderers, light and dark green. And these thieves and murderers, they supervised us. And we also got a number on our arms. Auschwitz was the only camp that tattooed. This is how the women looked. Typical women guards. And this is typical barrack. There were 6 people on each level, and sometimes the top level would fall onto the middle level and the middle on the lower level and kill the people on the lower level. There was constantly urine and feces dribbling from one level to the other. This was a women's barrack after liberation. That's when half the people were gone already because the other half went away on the death march. And this is a men's barrack after liberation. Again, half the people were missing. There were only 3 people on each level. The man in the middle has the only 2 properties that we had in the camp: a bowl and a spoon. And the bowl was filled in the morning with some brown wood made out of acorns, and we got 2 ounces of bread made out of flour and sawdust. For lunch we got a soup, which actually was salt water into which little pieces of unwashed dirty potatoes had been cut, and in the evening we got another bowl of the soup, and we got another 2 ounces of bread. Estimates range between 3 and 350 calories a day that we got. Obviously, eating the dirty food gave us frequently diarrhea, and that was the biggest cause of death short of gassing in the camp, diarrhea. I once was in an elder hostel in the south, and they told us about the Civil War. And the diarrhea was one of the biggest causes of death during the Civil War amongst the soldiers. This is a toilet that we had to use. There was no toilet paper there. And you could spend just about a couple of minutes there. Sometimes they used this bench to punish us. If you didn't stand in line properly, you put your feet into the 2 holes in the bottom, and you leaned over the bench just like this demonstration to Eisenhower, Omar Bradley, and Pat. This was done at the concentration camp in Ohrdruf in Germany at the liberation. And one criminal held the arms and the other one beat him to death. I've seen people being beaten to death. Usually they got about 10-15 strokes of the back. This is the way the camp looked, and 3 times a day we had to stand between the barracks and we counted, and if one prisoner out of 6,000 was missing, we had to stand there, snow, sleet, rain, ice, whatever, until the person could be found. There was no way you could escape from the camp because there were guard towers, there was electric charged barbed wire, there were German shepherds that had been trained to run after prisoners, and if people tried to escape, and they did, they caught them and then they put a big sign around their necks which says, "Hooray, hooray, I'm back again." And they were led into the camp, and then if they were lucky, they were hanged. If not, then, for instance, I once had to watch how 2 people were beaten to pulp with long wooden barrel poles. Many people couldn't take the camp, so they committed suicide. They just threw themselves against the wire. And every day, for about half an hour or so, the power was turned off and the bodies were removed, and then the whole thing started again. This is a picture of one of the crematoria. There were 4 crematorias next to us, and this is a picture of the gas chamber, and prisoners were forced to go naked into the gas chamber with their arms raised high. Then little children were thrown on top of them. The door was closed, and through this hole in the ceiling, the Cyclone B gas pellets were then tossed in. And once the people were dead, then special prisoners who've been assigned to a job, they lasted usually about 4 months, no more than 6 months, then they were gassed. They knew immediately once they'd been assigned to that job, that would be their death. They had to take the prisoners, they had to remove the gold teeth and the rings from their fingers, and then toss the bodies into these ovens and burn them. They managed to increase the capacity of these ovens to roughly 6,000 people a day. There was a company in Germany called Topf that created these crematoria, and they, to run a crematorium is an expensive proposition. You need a lot of coal. But they managed to develop a special oven, which they applied a patent for, where you would burn all bodies by using the fat from newly arrived prisoners, but you couldn't run it just on old prisoners. And all that remained of these prisoners is boxes full of wedding rings, glasses, shoes, clothing, and empty suitcases. This is what we saw. People sometimes ask me, what's the worst thing that ever happened to you in the camp? The worst thing was I was 16 years old, and I didn't know from one day to the next whether I'm going to be alive. So one day Dr. Mengele, and the air was, by the way, constantly filled with the smell of burning hair and burning flesh. It was constantly in our noses, and it constantly reminded us that maybe in an hour or so, we too will go through the chimney. When we arrived at the camp, all the prisoners told us, hey, in a few months you'll go through the chimney. And we thought it was a stupid joke. It took me 3 weeks, until I realized that it's really going to happen. It was as if somebody took an ice-cold hand and put it in my chest. One day Dr. Mengele came in the camp. Dr. Mengele had a PhD in anthropology. He also has an MD in medicine. He was always immaculate. He was Germany's expert on racial issues. Always had these beautiful belt buckles, highly polished, God with us. Would have been so much better if it said he was God. He was also affectionately known as the angel of death, because he just loved to select prisoners for the gas chamber. What was his job? His job was to experiment on prisoners, which he did. He had a special lab. He tied prisoners down, cut them open while they were alive, and then afterwards killed them. He did all different horrible experiments. I don't want to spoil your dinner for you. I have a book at home which talks about the work of Dr. Mengele. I started reading it. I bought it at great expense. I started reading it. After the middle of the first chapter, I closed it. I couldn't read it anymore. And I've been there, and I've seen it, and I just couldn't. Anyway, so it was selection time. And there was Dr. Mengele with a whole group of other SS men standing there telling jokes. And all the young people in the camp, anybody, the youngest were about 12 years old to about 18, we had to take our clothes off and we had to run past him, and he was standing there telling jokes. Occasionally he looked at us and he nodded his head in one direction or his head in that direction, and the person went then in that direction. And we were running for our lives. We were pushing our chests out, we were smiling, we were trying to be tall, and we were scrawny. We were just starved kids. And when it was finished, there were about 300 of us, and then we had to go run again, and then there were 200, and eventually 89. And the 89 of us, we were told to put our clothes on, and were sent to a different camp. And the other 5,900 over the next 5 days were sent to the... We were sent to the penalty barracks where we were. The gallows, camp gallows were in the backyard. I sat many a times on these gallows. And after a couple of months there, I was sent to Auschwitz I, and this is what Auschwitz I looked like. That's where all criminals were, and I was assigned to work in the stables. I cleaned the stables, I brushed the horses. There were special horses for German officers. And came Christmas time, there was a big announcement to all the criminals. By the way, the Nazi criminals there, they got good food, actually better food. They had a brothel there, they had a dining room, they had a movie house. Came Christmas time, was announced, all the criminals were put into German uniforms and they sent them to the Russian front. And obviously, we didn't dare to cheer, those of us who didn't go. But these guys, they went, as far as I know, from other people, they were all killed because they were put in the front rows, and from the Germans. In the meantime, the winter of 1944 to 1945 was the coldest winter on record in the 20th century. The temperatures were something like 30, 40 degrees below zero. It was Poland. Poland is cold to begin with, but that was absolutely unbelievably cold. And so in January, they gave us a piece of bread and said, start walking. And we started on a death march. And we walked for a couple of hours, and then we stopped, and those who couldn't get up were shot. And there were bodies all over in the snow and ice. There were people who couldn't get up off the ground. And we just walked. The first night we slept in the stables. I came in, and when I walked into one of the stables were filled. Everything was, everywhere were people. Even in the troughs where the cows were eating their food. So the only place I could find was between the legs of a cow. And I laid down between the legs of the cow, and the cow was above me. And I'm giving you this information. It's important because you realize that cows chew cud. And cows that chew cud drool. And they drooled on me, and I needed it like a hole in the head. And then the cow laid down on me, but it was nice and warm. And I was just thinking, if that damn cow doesn't get up in the morning, I'll be killed. But so in the morning the cow got up, and we continued on our death march. And this way, the second night we slept in a silo. And the third day, we were loaded into open railroad cars. And if you think it was cold on the road, you can't even imagine how cold it was in the wind blowing railroad car. And we traveled like that for 4 days from Poland until we came to Austria. In Austria, we ended up in a camp called Mauthausen, which was a concentration camp specially built for prisoners of war who had misbehaved in prisoner of war camps. You know, you saw these beautiful movies about American soldiers being so smart ass and you know, all this other thing, and outthinking German soldiers and so on. I mean, all these guys were there. They were forced to carry 100-pound rocks up 186 steps, and when they came to the top, they were pushed into the valley. They played parachute jumping without a parachute, as the Nazis called it. They had to push each other off the cliff into the valley. They were injected with gasoline. In the winter, they were stripped naked and sprayed with water. They had a room there where they extracted air. I mean, it was hell. We lived, well, maybe half the people who started the train ride ended there, the others died. By the way, altogether 60,000 people left Auschwitz on the first part of the death march. After 3 days, there were only 45,000 still alive. 15,000 died. It was the deadliest death march in the history of Germany. Has anybody here read the Diary of Anne Frank? Yeah, okay, fine. Peter von Pels was with me on the death march. I didn't see him, but he ended up in Mauthausen and he died in Mauthausen. So we limped through this gate and came into this yard, and we were taken into one of the barracks and were showered and collapsed screaming with pain because all of us were frostbitten. Some people dropped dead right there and then. I was in awful pain. After 3 days, my feet started to rot. And there was a Serbian doctor there who got somehow some few pieces of equipment, and made it up. And he cut off my toes on one foot and part of the toes on the other foot, and he had some paper from somewhere, and he bandaged me up, and that's how he saved my life. And then things got really bad because we got squeezed between the Russian forces and the American forces, and there was no food there. And while we were watched at the very beginning when we came by SS, all the SS men disappeared, and a group of old men and 14-year-old boys took over, and they simply got the grave. I slept next to a dead man for 3 days just to get his ration of a tablespoon of moldy bread a day. And on the 5th of May, we were liberated by American forces, and those of us who were alive looked like this. And I weighed 64 pounds when I was liberated. And the vast majority of people looked like this. And then the Americans gave us the only food that they had, military rations. And we ate these military rations, and about 20,000 people died eating them. And then troops got to the local population, and they had to pick up all the bodies, and they had to bury them. This rule was established, I think, by General Eisenhower, that he got the people of Ohrdruf and or in the area there to bury the locals. It's very, very interesting from a historian point of view. I have read a lot of stuff about the Holocaust, about the war and so on, and you being historians, may find it interesting. When Eisenhower was introduced to Aldrich, to that camp, and when he was led around and so on, he said, I want everybody in the town, Gotha, which was the town adjacent to it, I want everybody in the town to come and look at this camp. So he forced everybody in the camp to go through the camp and just, walk through it and organize proper, to see the bodies, to see those who were alive and so on. And the mayor of Gotha and his wife saw the camp and they went home. And they both committed suicide. And the mayor left a suicide note, which is, to me, one of the most telling documents of the Holocaust, of the murder, of all of this. The suicide note was very brief. All it said is, we didn't know, but we knew. Pretty well summed up. They just wanted to disassociate themselves from the situation. To me, the words, we didn't know, but we knew, tells the whole story. And that's why he committed suicide. Anyway, I was there for about 3 more weeks, and then I got a release from the camp, from the American authorities. And then I hitchhiked back by train. Took me nearly a week, and I came back to Yugoslavia. And there I found Marshal Josip Broz Tito. I didn't find my mother, who was dead, my father was dead, my sister was somewhere in Italy or what, and there I was under communism. And I don't want to bore you with it, but it took me a great amount of effort. I stayed there to come to England, and when I came to England, I had a couple of problems. My education stopped when I was 13. I couldn't speak English, and the only skills I had is I could steal bread and I could swear in 7 different languages. And there is extremely little demand for these skills. And so I started working as a laborer, then as a machine tool fitter, then as a tool and die maker. Eventually I got married and I came to the United States. And I went to college for 10 years at night, got my degree, and I'm here. I think I'm going to stop right here because the rest of the presentation is strictly educational. I'll tell the students to take care of each other about the bullying and so on. Are there any questions, whatever? There's only one thing, I have to come to you because my hearing is really awful. Have I left you speechless? Or? No, any questions? There isn't such a thing as a stupid question, only stupid answers, and I'm the one to provide them. 1 second, don't listen to me, please. I really can't hear you.
How old were you when you came to the United States?
When I came to the United States, I was 27 years old. I just got married to a lovely lady, and we've been married now 59 years. Yeah. Thanks. Now she's still the love of my life. She was my first girlfriend and only girlfriend, because one thing as historians, you have to remember that I lost all my teenage years. I didn't have a chance to go out with girls. I didn't have a chance to have a normal life. The other thing is this: when you hear people like me, my age, and I'm 87, when you hear us speak, you have to remember one thing, that our actions are based, or were based, on our upbringing. But our parents were Victorians. And Victorians firmly believed that children must be seen but not heard. I knew nothing about Hitler. I could tell you 10, 20 jokes about Hitler, Goering, and Goebbels. But I knew nothing about the activities of Hitler. I didn't know the reason why he left Germany for Yugoslavia. Most of the news were from Germany, and obviously they didn't say anything evil. Whenever the refugees from Austria came through Yugoslavia, they got in touch with my parents, they came to us, then the children were sent out of the room. It wasn't for children's ears. So the first time I realized what a concentration camp was, when I was in Auschwitz. And it was obviously too late. Yes, ma'am.
Did you ever reconnect with your sister?
Pardon?
Did you ever reconnect with your sister?
The question was, did I ever reconnect with my sister? Yes.
Good.
My sister had been placed by my mother with a family, and after about a year or so, the family said, it's getting too dangerous for us, you better leave. And so my sister escaped to Italy, and when she came to Italy, she was promptly arrested by the Italian police and put in a detention camp. And that's, the Italians had a good relationship with Jews for centuries, since for 2,000 years. The mayor of Rome was Jewish. Mussolini's girlfriend was Jewish. I mean, how close can you get? So, but they insisted, the Nazis insisted, that they have these detention camps. So they had detention camps. The problem was that occasionally they raided these detention camps, and they took people to the camps and to the concentration camps. Obviously, being tight conditions in these detention camps, caused diseases and people died, but they were not mistreated. A friend of mine, he and his father tried to escape to Switzerland. And he was an Austrian who came to Yugoslavia, and when Hitler came, he managed to get some guide to lead him into Switzerland, and when he came to Switzerland, the Swiss guards arrested them and handed them over to the Italians. The Italians put them into a detention camp. The Germans raided the detention camp, and took him to Auschwitz. And I met him in Auschwitz by sheer coincidence. And then they split. He went one direction, I went in the other direction, and we met again. But the Italians, that's what they followed. So, any other questions?
How did you get out?
No, don't. I really.
How did you get out of the concentration camps? Were you freed by the Allied Army?
We were freed by the Allied armies. We were freed by the American troops. As a matter of fact, one of the men who liberated me, I met him about 5-6 years ago. I was a speaker at the conference, and he was a speaker at the conference, and somehow we met beforehand just to talk, and suddenly we realized that he liberated me, and I didn't know the guy from a hole in the wall. But suddenly something sprung up between him and me, and we had this feeling we've known each other a lifetime, and we just hugged each other, and we became extremely close, really unbelievably close. He was an attorney. Unfortunately, he died a couple of months ago. He was 91, but he was a beautiful human being. He was a medical officer in the military, and he knew what I was talking about, and I tried to visualize what he tried to talk about, because when he walked into the camp as a soldier, nobody had told him what to expect. And these young people, he was 21 at that time, they walked into this camp and saw thousands, and I'm saying thousands of bodies, and thousands of starving people, and thousands of diseased people, heavily diseased people, and people who were out for revenge, to go out and storm into the local town and kill people, and they had to take care of all of this. And to control all of this, and to feed and to cure and to heal and to clean. I mean, the place, he said the place smelled from something like 6 miles away. They smelled the place. I didn't wash for 5 months. 5 months I didn't see water, so to speak, except a little bit for drinking. From the moment we came to the camp in January till May, I didn't wash. Just, and obviously there was no toilet paper there, and it was just impossible. Any other questions?
Did you ever know Alice Hertz-Sommer at Theresienstadt? She was a concert pianist.
No, I didn't know. I knew a few people in Theresienstadt. I knew a couple of people I worked with. I bunked with in Theresienstadt, and they were amongst the Birkenau boys, amongst these 89. By the way, of the 89 boys, out of the 6,000 who were saved by Dr. Mengele, when the war was over, only about 49 of us were still alive. The others were killed during the war, during the transports and stuff like that. Any other questions? Well, yes.
Did you ever go back to Auschwitz?
The question was, would I ever go back to Auschwitz? No. Auschwitz doesn't exist anymore. You know the old saying, you can't go home again. Auschwitz was not barracks. Auschwitz was not defense. Auschwitz was fear. Auschwitz was smell. Auschwitz was uncertainty. Auschwitz doesn't exist anymore. People think they go and see Auschwitz. They don't know what Auschwitz is. I wouldn't waste my time. It's a bunch of old buildings and finish. It doesn't mean anything. Auschwitz was shivering with cold. I'm not shivering with cold. If I'm cold, I put on an extra jacket. I didn't have an extra jacket. I was skinny, I was starved, Auschwitz was hunger. All of these things don't exist anymore.
How did you survive?
But
How did you survive?
how did I survive? Statistically, you know, I mean, you take and draw a nice statistical curve. You know, how many people survived? There were very few. Very few survived. You know, somebody has to survive, you know, under any conditions, you know. Sometimes you don't. But so, I could have been just as well dead as the next guy. Just statistical probability that it happens, you know. I mean, the bullet missed me, and that's it. It was not because of my good looks, sunny dispositions, wisdom, or other positive assets. No, just luck. Any other question?
Where did your wife come from?
Where did my wife come from? I keep asking her frequently that question. My wife was born in Czechoslovakia, and that's why I call her my little bouncing Czech. She was born in Czechoslovakia, and she lived in Brno. And in 1938, her mother went to England to pave the way for her to follow her. But that didn't work out too well. But there was a man called Nicholas Winton. Nicholas Winton was an English stockbroker, 29-year-old stockbroker, who went on vacation to Czechoslovakia. When he came to Czechoslovakia, his friend, a diplomat, told him there are lots of children here who have no parents. So Nicholas Winton decided to get these children out of Czechoslovakia. He forged documents, he raised money under the Kindertransport, and he saved 669 children. And my wife is one of the 669 children saved by Sir Nicholas Winton. He's been knighted by the Queen, and he's still alive at the ripe old age of 104. And she lived in English boarding houses, in boarding schools, and so on. And so she was a real English lady. And that's where my wife comes from.
Good question.
I think it's time to leave, and I'd like to thank you very, very much. Thank you.